The first time I heard her voice, I was in the act of throwing a book across the room. It struck the wainscoting with a sound like a slap, and I heard my housekeeper draw in a sharp breath at the doorway, and then a second voice, unfamiliar, calm as still water, said, "You have thrown Mr. Defoe rather farther than he deserves, Your Grace. He was only just becoming interesting." I turned toward the sound the way I turn toward everything now, with my whole body, since my eyes no longer do the work of finding people for me. "Who is that?" "Miss Eleanor Vane, Your Grace," said Mrs. Hollis, my housekeeper, in the too bright voice she used when she had done something she suspected I would not like. "She has come about the position." "I did not advertise a position." "You advertised for a reader 3 months ago, and then you dismissed the notion, and I did not withdraw the notice from the paper because I did not agree with you dismissing it," said Mrs. Hollis, who had been in service to my family since before I was born, and had never once in that span of years feared me, even now, even blind, even when the rest of the county had taken to speaking of me the way one speaks of a shut door. Miss Vane answered it. "She has walked the whole way from the village because I forgot to send the trap for her, which I am ashamed of, and she has not once complained." "I did not think complaining would improve the walk," said the voice, Miss Vane's voice, and there was something in it, some current of dry humor moving under the calm, that made me lower the second book I had been on the point of also throwing. "I must tell you what my house had become before she came into it, so that you will understand what she changed. I am Julian Ashford, 7th Duke of Marchwood, though the county had taken to calling me, behind gloved hands and in the safety of drawing rooms I could no longer see into, the Midnight Duke. For the black hangings I would not have removed from the hall 2 years after there was any occasion for them. For the black coats I wore because I could not tell one color from another and had stopped caring to ask. And I think, for the darkness itself, which had become in the popular imagination a kind of moral condition, rather than the simple physical fact that my eyes had ceased, 18 months before, to show me anything at all. It happened on the North Road, in a storm, in a curricle my brother was driving too fast because he was 23, and had never in his life driven anything slowly. I remember the crack of the axle and the lurch in my brother's voice shouting my name, and then a long white silence, and when the silence ended, I was in my own bed at Marchwood with my head bound in linen, and a physician telling my mother, in the hushed voice people use when they think the patient cannot hear, that the Duke would live, but that the Duke would not see again. They did not tell me, in that same hushed voice, for 3 days that my brother had not lived at all. I will not dwell on the year that followed, except to say that grief and blindness together make a man very poor company, and I had been, before the accident, a man who prided himself on being excellent company, a man who filled his house with music and argument and too many guests at Christmas, a man my brother used to say could charm a stone into rolling uphill. That man died on the North Road as surely as my brother did, and what was left of him retreated to Marchwood and shut the drapes, though the drapes made no difference to him at all, and told his household he would receive no one. His household obeyed him mostly for 18 months, until Mrs. Hollis, God keep her stubborn heart, decided that obedience had gone on long enough. "You'll see her," Mrs. Hollis said to me now, in the drawing-room, in a tone that was not a question. "She has walked 4 miles in the wet for a position that pays little enough, and you will at least hear her out before you send her back into it." I opened my mouth to say that I would do no such thing, that I required no reader, that I required nothing at all from the world beyond to be left in it undisturbed. And then Miss Vane spoke again, before I could get the refusal out, and something in the plainness of what she said stopped me. "I should tell you, Your Grace, before you decide anything," she said, "that I have a scar on my face. I mention it only because most people mention it themselves, sooner or later, whether or not I have asked them to, and I have found it saves a great deal of time to simply put it on the table at the start, like a bill that must be paid before the meal can be enjoyed. I stood very still. Why should you imagine that concerns me? It concerns everyone, she said, without bitterness, as though remarking on the weather. I did not think you would be different merely for being blind. People manage to hear a scar in a voice somehow, or believe they can, and treat you accordingly before you have said 3 sentences. I have decided it is less exhausting to announce it than to wait for it to be discovered and whispered over. I found myself, for the first time in longer than I could easily reckon, almost smiling. Miss Vane, I promise you I have not the faintest notion what your face looks like, scarred or otherwise, and I confess I had not thought to ask. I was rather more preoccupied with the fact that you called Mr. Defoe interesting, when I have just spent an hour proving to my own satisfaction that he is not. You have spent an hour proving that Robinson Crusoe irritates you, she said. That is not at all the same thing as proving him uninteresting. A great many things which irritate us are interesting for precisely that reason. Mrs. Hollis made a small sound that I understood, from long acquaintance, to be the sound of a woman suppressing a laugh. Sit down, Miss Vane, I said, and tell me why a shipwrecked man cataloging goats for 40 pages does not irritate you as it irritates me. She sat. I heard the rustle of a plain gown, no silk in it, a fabric that did not announce wealth, and she told me, with more wit than I had encountered in that room in a year and a half, why she thought Crusoe's goats mattered, and I forgot, for the length of that conversation, to be the duke that Marchwood had made of me. I only remembered dimly, distantly, what it had once felt like to enjoy an hour. I hired her before she left the house. I told myself it was for the reading. I have since had a great deal of time to consider that I was already, in that very first hour, beginning to fall in love with a voice, the way a man in a dark room begins to love the single window that still lets in light, without at first understanding that it is light he is starving for. She came 6 days out of 7, in the afternoons, and read to me in the drawing-room where the heavy velvet drapes I could not see stayed drawn, because it had not occurred to anyone in a year and a half to open them for a man who would not know the difference. It was a leaner. I came very quickly to think of her as a leaner, though I was careful at first to say Miss Vane aloud, who noticed. "Your Grace," she said, perhaps a fortnight into her employment, in the middle of a chapter of Mrs. Radcliffe that she had been reading with theatrical relish, clearly enjoying the Gothic excess of it more than she would admit. "Why are your drapes drawn in the middle of the afternoon?" "Are they?" I could not say. "They are. The room is like a crypt." "I do not object to reading in a crypt, if that is your preference, but I confess I would enjoy Mrs. Radcliffe's villains a good deal more with some actual daylight to laugh at them by." "Open them, then, if it pleases you." I heard her cross the room, heard the ring scrape along the rod, heard, though I could not see it, the room change around me, some quality in the air itself, a warmth against the side of my face that I had genuinely forgotten a window could offer. "There," she said. "Now I can see your face properly, which is a great advantage to me even if it means nothing to you. You have a very expressive face for a man who does not know it is being looked at, Your Grace. You scowl magnificently when Mr. Defoe or Mrs. Radcliffe displeases you." I was not aware I was performing for an audience. "Everyone performs for an audience," she said. "You simply forgot you had gained one who could see. It is rather freeing, I imagine, to scowl without consequence, until someone tells you that you have been seen scowling all along." I laughed. I want to record plainly that I laughed, an unguarded sound I had not made since before the North Road, and I heard the small catch in her own breath that told me my laughter had surprised her as much as it had surprised me, and pleased her besides. It became, after that, a habit between us that she would tell me small true things about the world I could no longer see for myself, not out of pity, never out of pity, but out of what I came to understand was simply her nature, a refusal to let a thing go unremarked merely because it might be considered impolite to remark upon it. She told me when my valet had shaved me carelessly and left a patch of stubble by my ear. She told me when the first snowdrops came up along the south wall, and described them to me with such precision, the particular green-white of the bell, the way they hung their heads as though embarrassed by their own courage in blooming so early, that I found I could see them better in my mind than I had seen actual snowdrops with my actual eyes in 20 years of walking past them unregarded. She told me, one afternoon in early spring, that the sun coming through the window struck her hair a particular shade she could only call the color of strong tea held up to a candle. Because I had asked her, abruptly, what color her hair was, and she had laughed and said no one had ever demanded a description of her hair with quite such urgency, as though I meant to paint it myself. I find, I said, feeling my way carefully toward an admission I had not planned to make, that I have begun to want a picture of you, Miss Vane, not out of idle curiosity. I have come to depend upon your voice for a great many hours of every week, and it troubles me that I have built you, in my mind, entirely out of sound, and I cannot tell if the woman I have built bears any resemblance to the woman who is actually sitting in that chair. There was a silence longer than any that had passed between us before. I should rather you did not ask Mrs. Hollis to describe me, she said at last, carefully. Servants gossip, Your Grace, even loyal ones, and I would rather you heard it from me, if you are truly curious, than have it delivered to you second-hand with whatever softening or unkindness the teller brings to it. Then tell me. I am not a beauty, she said. I want that understood first plainly so there is no disappointment stored up for later. I have brown hair, as I said, and gray eyes, and I am neither tall nor short. And I have a scar here. I heard her hand move, though of course I could not see where it went, along my jaw and down onto my throat on the left side. I was 11. There was a fire in my father's stable, and I went in after the horses because no one else would, and I got the horses out, all 4 of them, and I very nearly did not get myself out, and what the fire left behind it has followed me into every room I have entered since. Children stared when I was young. Grown men and women still stare, though they pretend they are not staring, which is somehow worse. I have had 2 proposals of marriage in my life, from men who wished, I believe, to prove to themselves that they were generous enough to overlook it, and I refused them both, because I did not want to be married by a man who thought of loving me as an act of charity toward a damaged object. I sat with that for a long moment, turning it over, understanding it in a way I suspect I could not have understood it a year and a half before, when my own eyes still worked, and I still moved through the world assuming, as the fortunate always assume, that a scar and a soul were separate matters, one merely worn atop the other. Miss Vane, I said finally, I went into a burning building once myself, not to save horses. To save my brother's dog, who was too stupid and too beloved to know enough to run from smoke. I did not think myself heroic for it. I thought myself a man who could not bear to lose one more thing that year. I imagine you did not think yourself heroic either, at 11, going in after those horses. I imagine you simply could not bear to stand outside and listen to them scream. I heard her breath catch again, differently this time, not surprise, but something closer to being unexpectedly, thoroughly understood. No, she said very quietly, I could not bear it, that is exactly it. No one has ever put it that way to me before. They call it brave, as though I chose it the way one chooses a hat. I do not think either of us chose very much. That year the world decided to test us, I said. I did not choose to lose my eyes on the North Road. You did not choose to be marked by a fire that was not your doing. I have spent 18 months believing that what happened to me makes me half a man, unfit to be looked at, unfit to be sat with, a burden dressed in a duke's coat. Perhaps you have spent a good many years believing something not unlike it. I have, she admitted, so low I nearly did not catch it. I have spent a great many years arranging my life so that I need not test whether anyone could love the whole of me, scar included, because it is easier to assume the answer and avoid the asking. Then we are neither of us, I think, quite so different as the county believes, I said. They call me the Midnight Duke, as though I have become some manner of ghost haunting my own house. I dare say they have unkind names for you as well, though you are too generous to repeat them to me. They call me the scarred spinster of Thorn Cottage, she said, with a small, rueful laugh that did not quite disguise the old hurt beneath it. It is not original, but it is at least accurate as to the cottage. I think, I said, that between the two of us, we have collected a very great many unkind names, and not a single one of them has anything true to say about either of us. She did not answer that at once, and when she did, her voice had changed, grown warmer and unsteadier, in a way I felt in my own chest before I understood what it meant. No, she said, I do not think they do. That was the afternoon, I believe now, looking back across the whole of what followed, when whatever had been growing quietly between us for a fortnight stopped pretending to be merely a matter of convenient employment, and became something neither of us yet had the courage to name. It was not many weeks after that my aunt, Lady Prestini, descended upon Marchwood in her traveling coach with the particular purpose, I came quickly to understand, of inspecting whatever rumor had reached her in town. She had never troubled to visit in the whole of my blindness before, and I did not flatter myself that affection alone had finally moved her. They tell me, she said, once tea had been poured and Mrs. Hollis dismissed, in a voice pitched for my ears alone, though I suspected it carried perfectly well down the passage, that you have taken a companion into this house. A Miss Vane, of no family anyone can name, with some manner of disfigurement, and that you walk with her in the garden of an evening. Julian, I must ask you plainly, do you understand what will be said, if this becomes known beyond Marchwood? I understand precisely what will be said, Aunt. I have already heard several versions of it from my own valet, who is considerably kinder in the saying than I suspect you mean to be. I do not say it unkindly. I say it as a woman who wishes to see you settled, and settled well, not made a subject of pity twice over, once for your eyes, and once for a wife the county will whisper you could do no better than, given your condition. I felt something harden in me that had not hardened in a long while, not grief this time, but something closer to the old temper my brother used to tease me for, before the North Road took the teasing and the brother both. My condition, as you call it, has taught me a great deal these 18 months, Aunt, chief among it that a person's worth is not printed upon their face for the world to price at a glance. Miss Vane has a scar. I have no eyes at all. Between the two of us we could not muster a single feature the ton would call fashionable, and I find, remarkably, that I have never in my life cared less what the ton finds fashionable than I do at this moment. If it becomes known that I esteem her, let it become known. I will not apologize for it, and I will not have her spoken of in this house as a misfortune I have been talked into. My aunt was quiet a long moment, long enough that I heard the small clink of her cup returning to its saucer with unusual care. You sound, she said at last, and I could not tell if the note in her voice was disapproval or something nearer to surprise, more like yourself than you have sounded in 2 years, Julian. I confess I do not know what to make of that. Make of it what you like, I said, gentler now, for I had not meant to speak so sharply to a woman who had, after all, come some distance out of what she believed was concern. But know that whatever you make of it, my regard for Miss Vane is not a thing I intend to be argued out of, by you or by anyone else the county sends to try. She left the following morning, cooler than she had arrived, and I heard nothing further from her on the subject for some months, though I learned afterward from Mrs. Hollis that she had stopped in the village on her way and had been heard to remark, to whoever would listen, that the Duke of Marchwood had grown remarkably stubborn for a blind man, which Mrs. Hollis repeated to me with unmistakable satisfaction, as though it were the finest compliment my aunt could have paid. I did not tell Elena of the visit for some days, not wishing to burden her with a cruelty she had not been present to hear, but she guessed something of it regardless, From some change in my manner, she would not afterward explain beyond saying that a man who has just been made to defend a thing carries the defending in his voice for a while after, whether he means to or not. When I did tell her, plainly, as I had promised myself I would always try to be with her, she was silent a moment, and then she said only, "You did not have to defend me, Julian. I have defended myself alone for a great many years and grown rather good at it." And I told her that was precisely why I had wanted to do it for her, once, so that she might know, at least once in her life, what it felt like to have someone else stand in front of the wind for a change. I did not see her. I never saw her, not with my eyes, not once in the whole of our acquaintance. But I began, in those weeks, to know her with a thoroughness I had never managed with any woman I had actually looked upon. I knew the particular rhythm of her footsteps on the drawing-room floor, quick and light and slightly uneven on the left, a limp so faint I do not believe she knew I had noticed it, a relic, she told me later, of the same stable fire, a beam that had come down across her ankle as she led the last horse out. I knew the sound she made when a book pleased her, a small satisfied exhale through the nose, entirely involuntary, that she would have been embarrassed to know I had catalogued so precisely. I knew when she was troubled, because her reading grew very slightly faster, as though she were trying to outrun whatever thought was chasing her. I knew when she was near enough to touch, because the air itself seemed to gather warmth around her, some quality I could not explain and did not try to, only trusted, the way a plant trusts the sun without understanding photosynthesis. And I came to understand, somewhere in the second month, that I had stopped thinking of my blindness in her company as a wound at all. It had become, instead, simply the manner in which I knew her, not a lesser way of knowing a person. I began to believe, but perhaps in some respects a truer one, unclouded by the first impressions that a scarred face or a duke's black coat might otherwise have thrown up between two people before either had said a single honest word. My valet, Simmons, a good man but a cautious one, was the first in the household to voice what I suspect several of them had begun to think. He was shaving me one morning, and his razor paused at my jaw a moment too long, and I knew from long habit that he was working up to say something he judged unwise. "Say it, Simmons," I told him. "You have gone still in a manner that means you are composing a sentence you fear I will not like." "It is only, Your Grace," he said, "that Mrs. Hollis mentioned you had asked Miss Vane to walk with you in the garden yesterday after her reading. I do not say it is improper. I only wonder whether Your Grace has considered how it will look, a duke walking a hired companion about the grounds of an evening, when the lady has no chaperone and no fortune, and the county already watches Marchwood closely enough to make a story of a dropped teacup. And what story would they make of it, do you suppose?" Simmons was quiet a moment, drawing the razor along in one careful stroke before he answered, "That Your Grace is lonely, and she is convenient, and it will end unhappily for the lady, whatever Your Grace intends by it. Forgive me for saying so plainly." I sat with the accusation, because it deserved sitting with, and because I had, in the privacy of my own mind, already turned the same fear over more than once. I have asked myself the same question, Simmons, and I will answer you as honestly as I have answered myself. I do not know yet what I intend. I know only that I have not laughed in 18 months until Miss Vane began reading to me, and I do not intend to let a fear of gossip rob me of the only good hour in my day, merely because the county has decided that a blind man's affections must always be either pitiable or improper, and never simply true. I did not say improper, Your Grace. You did not need to. I heard it under the words. I turned my face toward him, though I could not see whether he flinched. "I will tell you what I will not do, Simmons, so that you need not carry the worry alone. I will not trifle with her. Whatever comes of this, she will not leave Marchwood diminished by having entered it. That much I can promise you, and I mean to keep the promise." He said nothing further on the matter, though I noticed, in the weeks that followed, that he took to laying out my better coats on the days Miss Vane was expected, without my ever having asked him to, which told me more plainly than any words could have that his doubt had begun, quietly, to turn itself into hope on my behalf. There was a fortnight, not long before that evening, when I feared I had lost her before I had ever properly won her. She came late to her reading 3 days running, and her voice when she read had lost the warmth I had grown so accustomed to, gone careful and distant, the voice of a woman reciting rather than speaking. I asked her on the 3rd day what troubled her, and she told me at first that nothing did, in a tone that told me a great deal did. "Eleanor," I said, setting aside all pretense of patience, "you have read me 4 pages of a novel in which, by your own account a week ago, a great deal of shouting and at least 1 duel ought to have occurred by now, and you have delivered every line of it as though reading out a list of household linens. Something is wrong. I would rather you told me than have me sit here inventing worse explanations in the dark, which I promise you I am fully capable of doing." She was quiet long enough that I thought she might simply rise and leave the room, and my chest went tight at the thought of it. Then she said, "Lo, my aunt in the village had a visit this week, from a woman who used to be a friend to my mother before my mother died. This woman was kind enough to inform my aunt, who was kind enough to inform me, that all the village is now saying I have set my cap at the Duke of Marchwood, and that it is a shameless thing for a woman in my situation to attempt, and that you will tire of the novelty of me soon enough, once you have grown used to having a voice in the house, and marry properly, as a duke must." I told myself I did not care what the village says of me. I have told myself that for a great many years, about a great many things. I find, to my considerable irritation, that this time it is not entirely true. "And do you believe them?" I asked, as steadily as I could manage, though something in me had gone cold and urgent at the picture she had painted. "That I esteem you as a novelty and will tire of it?" "I do not know what I believe, Julian," she said, and for the first time since I had known her, her composure cracked openly, and I heard something raw underneath it that she had clearly spent years learning to keep hidden. "I know that I have built my whole life around expecting disappointment, because expecting it hurts a great deal less than being surprised by it. It is safer to assume the village is right than to hope you are different from every other person who has ever looked past me or through me, and be wrong, and have to start all over again learning how to bear it. Then let me be plain, since plainness is the only ground either of us has ever trusted to hold our weight," I said. "I do not know yet what name to put to what I feel for you, because I have been too much of a coward to examine it closely, for fear of what I might find and what I might then be obliged to do about it. But I know it is not novelty. Novelty wears thin, Eleanor, and what I feel when I hear your step in the passage has done nothing these 2 months but grow, not thin. If the village wishes to call that shameless, they are welcome to. I have found, since the North Road, that I care a good deal less for the good opinion of people who have never once had to learn a world without their eyes, or without a mother, or with a mark upon their face that strangers cannot help but stare at. Do not leave this house because a stranger's friend was unkind to your aunt. Stay, and let me prove myself steadier than the village believes a duke capable of being." She did not answer at once, but her reading, when she resumed it a moment later, had found its warmth again, and I understood, without being told, that whatever fear had gripped her that week had loosened its hold, at least enough to let her stay. The garden at Marchwood runs down from the terrace in a long slope of clipped yew and old roses to a stone fountain my grandfather built, and it was in that garden, some weeks later on a warm evening in early June, moonlit though I could not have told you so myself, that everything between us finally came into the open. We had fallen into the habit by then of walking there after her reading was done, she guiding my arm along paths I had once known well enough to walk unassisted and now walked only by her direction. "A low step here, your grace. Mind the border there. The roses lean into the path just past the sundial, and I have not the heart to cut them back." I had come to treasure those walks more than any hour of the day, more even than the reading, because in the garden there were no books between us, nothing to discuss but ourselves, and I had found, to my own quiet astonishment, that I wanted very much to discuss myself with her, a thing I had not wanted with any person living since my brother died. "You have been quiet this evening," she observed, as we came to the fountain and stopped as we always stopped, so that I could put my hand out and feel the cool spray drifting from it, the nearest thing to sight the garden offered me. "I have been trying to find the courage to say something," I said, "and discovering that a duke's courage, it turns out, is no more reliable than any other man's. That is a very grave admission from a man who once threw Robinson Crusoe across a room, without a flicker of hesitation." "Books are easier to be brave about than people," I said. "Eleanor," I had not called her that aloud before. I heard her go very still beside me. "I must tell you something, and I find I do not know how to say it gently, so I shall simply say it plainly, as you yourself are always so admirably plain. I did not hire a reader 18 months after I stopped wanting to hire anything at all. Mrs. Hollis did not merely fail to withdraw a notice from a newspaper. I believe now, looking back, that some obstinate part of me had been waiting, without knowing it, for a voice worth listening to. And then you walked 4 miles in the wet and announced your own scar to me before I had even learned your name. And I have not had a single day since that I did not look forward to more than I have looked forward to anything since my brother died." Julian. It was the first time she had used my given name, and I felt it land somewhere beneath my ribs like a stone dropped into still water, sending its rings out through the whole of me. I have told myself for a month that I must not let myself want this. A blind Duke of Marchwood can have any lady in the county read to him he pleases. Once word gets about that he receives visitors again, and I have told myself it would be foolish, and worse than foolish, cruel to myself, to let my heart run ahead of what is sensible. And has it run ahead regardless? "Yes," she said, so quietly I had to lean toward the sound of it. "Yes, it has. I have sat in that drawing-room for a month now telling myself that you cannot see my scar, and so it does not signify to you the way it has signified to every other person who has ever looked at me. And I have told myself that is not a foundation to build any real feeling upon, because one day you might wish to see me again, if such a thing were ever possible, and then—" "Eleanor." I found her hand where it rested near mine on the fountain's stone rim, and I closed my fingers around it, gently, the way one closes a hand around something one is half afraid will prove, on contact, to be only imagined. Her fingers were cool from the spray, and they trembled very slightly, and then steadied, as though my touch had answered some question she had been too proud to ask aloud. "I want you to hear me say this plainly, because I think plainness is the only coin either of us has ever really trusted. I do not love you despite not being able to see your scar. I do not love you because I cannot see it either, as though blindness were doing me some great favor by hiding an unpleasant truth from me. I love you because I have spent a month learning the whole shape of you through every means left to me, your voice, your wit, your kindness that never once curdled into pity, the particular way you go quiet when you are moved and try to hide it by clearing your throat, which you are doing at this very moment, and which does not fool me in the least." She made a sound that was half laugh, half something closer to tears, and did not pull her hand away. "If I could see," I went on, "I believe I would want to look at your face for a very long time, not despite the scar, not around it, but at the whole of it, because I have come to understand that the scar is only one line in a very long story, and I have fallen in love with every other line in it besides, and I do not imagine one more line would trouble me in the slightest. But I cannot see, Eleanor, and I find, to my own surprise, that I have stopped grieving that fact quite so bitterly as I once did, because it was blindness that let me hear you properly, without the noise the eyes so often make, jumping ahead of the heart and deciding things the heart was never consulted about. Julian." Her voice broke just slightly on the second syllable of my name. I came to this house because I needed the wages, and because I was tired, so tired, of being the woman people looked away from in the village. And I told myself I would simply do my work and go home each evening with my dignity intact and expect nothing more from the world than that. I did not expect, she stopped, and I felt her free hand come up hesitant and rest against my jaw, the way I so often rested my own hand against a face or an object to know its shape. And I understood with a fullness that nearly undid me that she was doing now what I had always done to know the world. She was reading me the only way I had ever read her, by touch, by the texture of a moment neither of us could see and both of us, at last, fully felt. I did not expect to be seen. Truly seen. Not looked at. I have been looked at my whole life, Julian, stared at, until I stopped believing that being looked at and being seen were even related activities. You are the first person who has ever seen me without once looking, and I do not know how to tell you what that has done to the shape of my heart, except that it has grown a room in it that I did not know was missing, and it is filled now entirely with you. I turned my face into her hand, the way a man turns toward the sun though his eyes give him no report of its light, trusting only the warmth on his skin to tell him it is there. Then let it stay filled, I said. Marry me, Alina. Not because a duke requires a wife, and not because I am too proud to say plainly that I cannot manage this house, this grief, this darkness, without you in it. I can manage it. I have managed it badly for 18 months, and I do not wish to manage it any longer when there is another way to live it instead. Marry me because I have fallen entirely and helplessly in love with the whole of you, scar and voice and quick step, and the small satisfied sound you make when a book pleases you. And because I believe, with everything left to me to believe with, that you have fallen in love with the whole of me as well. The duke and the blind man and the brother who could not save his own brother, and the man who has, against every expectation the county holds of him, found in you the first true daylight he has known in a year and a half of drawn curtains. For a moment she said nothing at all, and the only sound in the garden was the fountain's soft, endless fall of water, and somewhere beyond the yew hedge an owl calling once, low, into the dark. Then she laughed, a small, astonished, joyful sound, entirely unguarded, the sound I imagine she made as a girl before the world taught her to guard herself, and she said, "Yes. Yes, Julian, I will marry you." And I felt her lean forward slowly, giving me every chance to know what was coming by the warmth of her breath before her lips found mine, gentle and sure. And I understood in that single, unhurried moment more of her face than I believe I could ever have understood by looking at it. The softness at the corner of her mouth, the small catch of her breath, the whole trembling truth of a woman who had spent a decade believing herself unlovable and had just discovered, in a moonlit garden she could not know I could not see, that she had been wrong the entire time. We were married in October, in the small stone chapel at Marchwood, with the drapes of the great house thrown open for the first time in 2 years to let the autumn light pour through every window, though I would not know that light by sight, only by the warmth of it against my face as I stood at the altar and waited for the sound of her step, that quick, faintly uneven step I had come to know better than I had ever known any sight, to come toward me down the aisle. Mrs. Hollis wept without shame in the front pew and told everyone within hearing, for years afterward, that she had known it from the very first afternoon. From the very moment Miss Vane had told a duke his taste in novels wanted improving, before she had even been given a chair to sit in. There were those in the county, of course, who whispered still, that the midnight duke had married beneath him, that a scarred nobody from Thorn Cottage had somehow contrived to catch a duke too broken to know any better, that pity and blindness together had made a poor match into a marriage. Alina heard some of it in the early months, at the few gatherings we were obliged to attend, and I felt her hand tighten in mine whenever some overheard unkindness reached her. But she had spent too many years already learning to stand steady under the weight of other people's staring, and I had spent too many months learning that the opinions of a drawing-room I could not see mattered a great deal less than the voice of the woman beside me, and between the two of us, the whispers found very little purchase. They faded in time, the way unkindness generally does when it is met with neither shame nor argument, but simply the quiet, visible fact of two people plainly, steadily happy. I think of that first afternoon often. Now, years on, the book struck against the wainscoting, the calm, unfamiliar voice observing that I had thrown poor Defoe farther than he deserved. The scar announced before a chair was even offered, as though she meant to spare me the trouble of discovering for myself what she had long ago decided the world would judge her for. I did not marry Alina despite anything. I did not overlook a mark upon her face I have never once seen, and in all honesty, no longer think of as a thing to be overlooked at all, any more than I think of my own blindness as a thing that needs forgiving. We were both, when we met, two wounded people the world had quietly decided were somehow lessened by what had happened to us. I by an accident on a storm-black road that took my brother and my sight in the same terrible hour. She by a fire she ran into rather than watch 4 horses burn. And what we found in each other, in a drawing room with the curtains finally thrown back and a garden fountain falling soft in the moonlight, was not 2 broken people mending each other, as the sentimental phrase would have it, but 2 whole people who had simply never before been looked at, or listened to, in a way that let them recognize their own wholeness reflected back. She reads to me still, some evenings, though there is no longer any obligation in it, only pleasure, and I have come to know every book in my library now by the particular cadence of her voice moving through it, so that I could not tell you what Mrs. Radcliffe's villains look like, but I could tell you exactly how Alina's voice drops and slows when she reaches the passages that frighten her, on purpose, deliciously, the way she has always approached every fear in her life, walking straight into it rather than away. And in the mornings, when the light comes warm through windows I cannot see but have long since learned to feel upon my face, I reach for her hand across the counterpane, and she takes it without my ever having to ask, and I think, every single time, that I am the most fortunate blind man in England, not because a duke's fortune bought me a wife, and not because pity or need brought 2 damaged people together for want of anyone better, but because on one ordinary wet afternoon, a woman with a scar she had stopped apologizing for walked 4 miles to read Robinson Crusoe to a man who could no longer see the sun, and in doing so, she taught him at last, entirely and forever, how to be truly, unguardedly seen.